Hello everyone. Potentially for the last time, you have completed your VCE economics exam, or you are potentially a VCE economics teacher who is watching this and wanting to know what potentially the correct answers for the multiple choice are. I'm going to try my best. It is 12:45. The exam's been going on for an hour. I've tried to work out all of the answers to the multiple choice questions as correct as possible. So we're going to go through these one by one and go through my flow of logic as to why they should be answered the way that they are and see how we go. A quick disclaimer before we start, I've done this the last 2 years. Chances are I may get at least one wrong. I'm feeling pretty good about these answers, but some of the questions are a little bit tricky in how they're worded, and in the rush of doing this, I may make a little mistake, so we can discuss that later on. We won't have 100% confirmation of the answers until VCAA starts marking exams. So we're going to try and do the best that we can for each question. So moving on to question number 1. Which one of the following is likely to be classified as structural unemployment? So we know structural unemployment is from changes in business structure due to cost cutting, downsizing, relocating offshore, technology. And so we're going to work out for each of these what type of employment that they are and which ones we can rule out. So a person loses their job as a tour operator due to a recession. That's decreasing aggregate demand, and therefore that should be technically cyclical based on the situation that's been given. So that's cyclical unemployment. Next up, a person loses their job as a fruit picker because there's no fruit left to pick. Well, that's seasonal, so we can rule that out. So we can cross out these first two. So 1, 2, get rid of them. A person loses their job as an accounting because they stole from the employer. That's more about personal factors that impacted them. That's going to be more hardcore. So we get onto the last one, which is a person loses their job as an economics teacher due to a decline in the number of students studying economics. That means the structure of the school is changing as they're offering different subjects and there's no longer a position for that teacher. And therefore D ends up being the most correct in my opinion currently. I was looking at A as a potential option when I first looked at this because the low AD is going to lead to business closures, etc. But because it specifically talked about a recession, which is a decline in economic activity, I feel like that is more closely aligned with cyclical unemployment, whereas D is more about the changing structure of the school and therefore is likely to be most correct. Question 2, a movement along the supply curve for broccoli is most likely to be caused by. So a movement in supply is only going to happen from a change in selling price. So with this, we need to get from one point on a supply curve to another. So it's going to look like moving up this supply curve from one point to another. And how is that going to happen? That's either going to be from an increase in selling price, if that's an option, or from something that's going to be favorable for aggregate demand, because we might want something that's going to get us to a new aggregate demand curve and therefore cause a movement in supply. So we can get rid of any supply factors here. So a shortage of skilled farm workers, that's supply based, we can rule that out. A decrease in the price of fertilizer, that's cost of production, that's supply, we can rule that out. A decrease in personal income tax rates, that's going to increase overall demand and therefore lead to a favorable shift. That's going to cause a movement in supply. The removal of excise tax on petrol used by farmers, once again, that's cost of production, we can rule that out because that's about shifting supply. So the decrease in personal income tax rates is the only thing that's going to lead to an increase in selling price from the supply point of view and an expansion of supply. Moving on to question number 3. Which one of the following reasons is the most likely to explain why the unemployment rate in a country remains high despite strong rates of economic growth? So this one is got a lot going on. So unemployment rate in a country remains high even though growth is strong. So we're going to find something that's going to lead to strong growth but also not decreasing unemployment. So if there's a fall in the participation rate, that is going to increase the unemployment rate, but it's going to mean there's less productive labor available and therefore it's likely to decrease economic growth. So we can rule out that. An increase in the number of part-time workers, that's going to decrease economic growth, so we can rule that out. Raising the school leaving age to 18 years old, that's going to decrease our productivity and therefore decrease economic growth. If there's an increase in the rate of productivity growth, that's going to mean we're getting more output per unit of input and therefore unemployment can remain the same, but we're growing more. So that explains that situation quite well. So D ends up being the answer there. With question 4, which one of the following factors is likely to have a different effect on Australia's rate of economic growth than the others? So with this, we're just going to work out which direction they're going to send economic growth. If there's an increase in the cash rate, that's going to decrease economic growth as it's going to constrict aggregate demand. An increase in the tax-free threshold is going to mean people have more disposable income and therefore is likely to increase aggregate demand. An increase in the rate of growth in China is going to increase the demand for our exports and therefore increase aggregate demand. If there's an increase in government spending, that's going to be increased injections to aggregate demand. Therefore, the one that is different is an increase in the cash rate, because that's going to cause a decrease in aggregate demand. Question number 5. Using this data, the rate of economic growth for the year ended in June 2022 was what? So with this, we need year 2 and year 1. So we can rule out a lot of data here. So we can ignore all this extraneous data. And we've got year 2 minus year 1 over year 1. So 48 minus 50 over 50 times 100. So that's going to end up being negative 2 over 50 times 100. What that ends up being is negative 4%. So of our options here, negative 4% is there, so we can choose that as the correct answer. Question 5. Which of the following goods is likely to have the highest price elasticity of demand? I think this is one of the trickiest questions on this whole exam. The highest price elasticity of demand means most elastic. Therefore, which is going to respond most to a change in price? Of these 3 options, I would argue that a few of them are price elastic. So I'd argue haircuts are elastic because they're not necessarily a necessity. Soft drinks are price elastic, and international travel can be elastic depending on factors. Cigarettes, inelastic, we can rule that one out because that's going to be the least elastic overall. So we can rule that out. So then it's about finding the most correct answer. So which is going to have the highest price elasticity of demand? So with this, I think what's going to happen here is there are situations where the other ones may be inelastic. So haircuts, depending on your occupation, haircuts may become a necessity, like if you're in the army, and therefore they're not necessarily going to have the highest price elasticity. International travel, if you have to leave tomorrow, it's going to be inelastic. Whereas soft drinks are always going to be elastic because they're never going to be a necessity, and therefore they're going to have the highest price elasticity of demand overall. Question 7. How could the 2022-23 Australian budget deficit be financed? Hopefully from this you know in the study design there are 3 main ways to finance a budget deficit, and they are by selling bonds or government securities to the private sector, overseas, or to the RBA. So we can rule out a bunch of these because by increasing company tax rates, that's going to be trying to finance a surplus. Reducing welfare spending is going to be trying to finance a surplus. Selling government bonds to foreign companies. A depreciation in the Australian dollar is most likely to be caused by an increase in it's not going to be terms of trade, because if the terms of trade increases, that means that we are receiving on average more for our exports relative to our imports. That's going to create more demand for the Australian dollar and therefore an appreciation of the exchange rate. Foreign travel expenditure by Australians, that's going to create more debits of the Australian dollar and more supply of the Australian dollar to the foreign exchange market, and that's likely to lead to a depreciation. So we can keep that in our brains here. The value of primary income credits in the balance of payments. So if there's an increase in primary income credits, that's going to create more demand for the Australian dollar. Therefore, we can rule that out. And if we had an increase in the value of foreign direct investment, that's going to create more demand for the Australian dollar. So we can get it down to B, foreign travel expenditure, because that's going to create more supply of the Australian dollar on the foreign exchange market and depreciate its value. On to question 9. So we've got this situation where we have basically all of the leakages and injections to aggregate demand. So we've got our, on one side, we've got our investment spending, government spending, and export spending. And then on the other side, we've got our savings, tax, and imports. So what we're going to do is basically work out which of the following statements is correct. So is the economy expanding or contracting based on the situation? So with this, savings is 30, imports is 55, and tax is 25. The order of this makes it very tricky if you're not paying attention. Private investment is 15, government spending is 20, and exports are 65. So if we add these up, we've got 55 plus 55, that's 110 for leakages. And then for injections, we've got 15 plus 20 is 35, plus 65 is 100. So we have more leakages than injections, which means the economy is going to be contracting. So we can rule out these bottom 2 answers. Then we just got to work out which one's the answer. It ends up being B, because leakages are greater than injections. Therefore, the economy is likely to be contracting. All right, on to question 10. Which one of the following international transactions would be recorded as a primary income debit in the current account section of Australia's balance of payments? So with this, we need to know a primary income debit. So that's going to be things like interest repayments, salaries or wages going overseas, dividends, etc. So the sale of education services to Australian universities to international students, that's going to be in net services, so we can rule that out. The purchase of government securities by American investment banks, that is not going to be part of that because that's not an income. The purchase of electronic devices is net goods, so we can rule that out. The payment of rent by Australian companies for retail space owned in Melbourne by Japanese companies is going to be a net income debit, as that rent is an income for those Japanese companies. Australia's current account balance is likely to worsen if China's rate of economic growth decreases. Well, if that happens, there's going to be less demand for our exports, and therefore that's going to decrease the current account balance. If there's an increase in national savings, that's going to make the current account balance better because we're not going to borrow as much or spend as much overseas. If there's an increase in the price of iron ore in the world markets, that should decrease demand for our exports, but really iron ore is demand inelastic, and therefore that's actually going to increase our exports and lead to an increase in the current account balance. Therefore, we can rule that one out. If Australian superannuation funds invest more in international shares, that's going to mean there's more credits coming in. Therefore, it will make the current account balance better. So it ends up being A if China's rate of economic growth decreases. On to question 12. If an economy moved into a contraction phase of the business cycle, which combination of outcomes would result? So in a contraction phase, there would not be an increase in interest rates because we're going to want to stimulate the economy. So we can rule out A straight away. An increase in household savings and a decrease in consumer confidence, well, that is likely to happen in a contraction because people are going to save as they're worried about the future, and consumers are going to be less confident as unemployment rises, incomes fall, etc. An increase in cyclical unemployment is true, but business confidence would decrease, so we can rule out C. A decrease in cyclical unemployment, well, that's not going to happen in a contraction because it's going to rise. So it is B, an increase in household savings and a decrease in consumer confidence. And then for our last three questions, which of the following government policy initiatives is least likely to increase both aggregate demand and aggregate supply? So least likely, very, very important here. So which of the following is likely to decrease aggregate demand and aggregate supply? So if we look at here, high childcare rebates is actually going to get more people into the workforce and increase aggregate supply, and people are going to have more income left over and therefore more aggregate demand. Lower company tax rates is going to mean that businesses are more likely to invest and expand, and they're going to have lower cost of production, so that's going to increase both. High tariffs on imported goods is likely to mean that we're going to import less, and also businesses that import as part of their production are going to have a higher cost of production. So that is going to decrease both aggregate demand and aggregate supply, so we can make that one C as the answer. Australia's international competitiveness, or the international competitiveness of a country, is most likely to fall if labour productivity decreases. Well, that is the answer straight away, but we'll go through the rest as well. So if real unit labour costs decrease, that is going to make us more internationally competitive, so we can rule that out. Its currency can buy less of foreign currency. That is going to make us less internationally competitive. And that's going to make us more internationally competitive because our dollar is worth less, and therefore there's going to be more demand for our exports. And if our inflation rate is lower than our trading partners, we are going to be more internationally competitive because our goods and services are cheaper to export, and therefore people are going to buy them. Then for the final question, which of the following would not be classified direct tax in the government's federal budget? So this means which one is going to be an indirect tax. The only one that is an indirect tax is goods and services tax, and therefore that is going to be the correct answer. So there you go. We have done all the multiple choice in just under 15 minutes. I hope this was helpful to you. Congratulations, you finished the exam. Hopefully it went well for you. A lot of the things we talked about potentially being on the exam were on the exam, which is excellent. Hopefully you feel really confident. It's a difficult exam, but I think it's a fair exam. So hopefully you feel really, really good about it. If you have any questions about any of these, feel free to comment below. I'm probably gonna have a little bit of time away from the exam tonight, so it might take me a few days to get back to you, but I hope it went well for you. I hope that if I've helped you in any way this year, I'm really happy about that, and I hope that you have benefited from all this content throughout the year. I hope you feel great. I hope your exams are almost over. If your exams are over, congratulations. Go and rest and relax and recover. If you've got a couple of exams left, focus on those now, and soon it will be all over. Hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.